Hey new Tekken players, as always I hope everyone is doing well. So today's video is going to be all about frame advantage and when you should or should not be pushing any buttons. Now I know the idea of talking about frame data may put a lot of people off as they see it as bringing maths into a game when all they really want to do is switch their brains off and play some Tekken. However, from my recent experience from playing back through the blue, green and yellow ranks, this was probably where most of my opponents were messing up and basically giving me the win. Now these were clearly talented players as they had good execution and optimal combos, but they didn't seem to understand the basics of knowing when it's your turn to fight back. So I will do my best to keep this as simple and relevant as possible for new players. So we will not be going into the super nerdy detail, but I'll do my best to use various visual aids that I can utilise within a video, as I think it's easier to understand this visually rather than just in the abstract. That all said, please believe me when I say that knowing the basics of frame data and knowing when it's your turn to push buttons and fight back is probably the most important thing to understand for new players who want to improve in the game. As always, if you want to see more videos aimed at new and upcoming Tekken players, please subscribe to the channel. Okay, so with that all said, let's crack on and look at the idea of frames. To make this as simple as possible, Tekken as a game runs at 60 frames per second. So 1 frame equals 1/60th of a second. So 30 frames would be half a second in real time. This is how the game runs and is separate to the frame rate that is displayed on your monitor. So if you were to run Tekken on an absolute potato PC, you may only see 30 frames per second on your screen, but the game mechanics are still running on 60 frames per second. Likewise, you can get mods that will display Tekken at 144 frames per second, and although it will look smoother to the eye, again it doesn't actually affect how the mechanics of the game are running. To put it another way, you could buy a TV that's 24 inch, 40 inch or 60 inches, and they all have a 4K resolution. So although the panel size is different, the resolution stays the same across all the 4K TVs. So to summarise again, a frame in this context is a measurement of time, and in this case it is 1/60th of a second. The amount of startup frames is how long your character takes from the moment you input the command until the time it takes to hit the opponent. So let's look at a really slow route to make this obvious. This is Paul's unblockable, which is a startup window of just over 60 frames. This is when he steps back and starts to charge up his fist. This is super slow at 60 frames, so it basically takes over a second to come out. Again, we're just using this as an example because it's so slow and it's really easy to see. A much faster example is the universal jab. This comes out in just 10 frames, so it's extremely quick. So when we talk about this move is fast as it comes out in X amount of frames, or this is slow because it comes out in Y amount of frames, then this is the basics of what we mean. So just to show you this in real time, I've set the dummy to duck and then do a down forward 1. The down forward 1 comes out in 13 frames, so it is relatively fast. If however I do a jab, which comes out in 10 frames, you'll notice that my jab will beat the down forward 1 because its startup is quicker. We'll get into the detail of this a bit later, but this is generally speaking what we mean when we talk about poking and poke wars, i.e. moves that may not actually do much damage, but they come out really quickly. The startup frames of each move can be seen here on the frame display, which is a DLC feature on Tekken. We'll look at the other numbers as we go along. Okay, so having looked at startup frames, let's look at frames on hit. So let's assume that you've managed to land a move on your opponent. As in real life, if you were to hit someone, they won't be able to hit back straight away after they've been knocked back. There is also a small amount of time before you can also hit them again. In effect, you're both recovering from the exchange. So, after you've taken both of those recovery times into account, someone is plus a certain amount of frames and the other is negative, and this is what we mean when we talk about frame advantage. So if after landing a move it only takes me 5 frames to recover, but it takes my opponent say 10 frames to recover, then I'm at plus 5, because 10 minus 5 equals 5. Okay, don't worry too much if the maths has gone over your head at this point. The crucial point is knowing after the exchange who is on plus and who is on minus, and therefore who is more likely to win if we were to both press buttons at the same time. The numbers that are displayed after the move has been hit show you how many frames each player is either at an advantage or disadvantage. Again, let's look at an example of this. If we hit the dummy with Paul's back 1-2, then we are now at plus 8. So this means if we were to both try and jab straight afterwards, my jab would come out 8 frames faster than my opponent's, because he needs 8 more frames to recover before I do. Or to put it another way, as long as whatever follow-up move I do is 18 frames or quicker, then it will come out faster than anything my opponent can do in retaliation. Just to show you this in action, Paul is going to hit me with back 1-2, and I will try to jab straight after. Now, watch what happens. Let's look at another quite common example of how using frame advantage works. I have set Kazuya to do a down back 4 and then immediately hit me with a down forward 2. I'm going to try and jab him as soon as the down back 4 hits. Now again, watch what happens. As you can see, we trade and I get counter hit launched. This is because down back 4 on hit leaves me at -4. So if I try to jab, which comes out at 10 frames, and he hits me with a down forward 2, which comes out at 14 frames, we hit each other exactly the same time, because he has 4 extra frames of advantage. Moves on hit that give you enough plus frames to score a counter hit if your opponent tries to retaliate are commonly known as frame traps. Here's a few more examples of those frame traps. Okay, so we've looked at frames on hit, where generally speaking, the person who lands the hit is at an advantage. So let's look now at frames on block. As before, a move has the same amount of startup frames, but if the move is blocked, then the recovery frames for each player now changes. Again, generally speaking, the person who blocks the move recovers quicker than the person who tried to land the move in the first place. Let's look at some really exaggerated examples where the animation makes it very obvious, which is generally when you block a low sweep. Right, if you block a move that gives you at least 10 frames or more of advantage, this means you can guarantee to land at least a jab, which is 10 frames fast, for free on your opponent, because they're still recovering from the move and so cannot recover in time to block. Moves that are at least minus 10 frames on block are referred to as being unsafe, because they can't be punished. Just to make it clear though, although a lot of frames are quote unquote safe on block in that you cannot get punished, remember that you are generally still at a disadvantage, and so you need to be careful about just starting to press more buttons after the move is blocked. More on this later. Okay, so having explained the general rule of thumb, that is, if you've blocked a move then you're generally at an advantage, there are however some moves in the game where even if you block them, the block stun and recovery is actually slower than the move's recovery. So despite blocking the move, you're still at a disadvantage. This is what we mean when we say this move is plus on block. Now the amount of plus on block moves you have is very dependent on your character. Some characters have frankly a silly amount. Yes, I'm looking at you, Harang mains. Whereas others have hardly any at all. But, crucially, every character in this game has a plus and block move with a startup of only 10 frames. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the mighty one jab. We'll come back to this soon, but this is why high level players, including JDCR, talk about the one jab being one of the most important moves in the game. It's not the damage, but it's the fact it's super fast and it's a way of keeping your momentum and your frame advantage, because even on block it's +1. It's also a sneaky way of taking your turn back, because it's so fast to come out. So hopefully now you understand what we mean when we talk about startup frames, which is how fast the move comes out, frames on hit, and frames on block. But you're probably wondering, what on earth does this mean to how I play Tekken, especially in the low ranks where everyone is just spamming moves in your face? So let's begin by talking about poking. What we mean by poking is using fast but low damage moves to try and chip away at your opponent's health bar and, more importantly, stopping your opponent from fighting back by keeping frame advantage. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to attempt to play Kazumi and use nothing but her pokes to see if I can win a match. Now bear in mind, I've never played Kazumi before, I can't even do any combos with her, but I do know her key poking tools of jabs, down forward 1 and down back 4 for a low. So let's see if I can channel my inner Arslan Ash and see if I can steal a round or a game through using only pokes.
Get ready for the next battle. Round 1. Fight. KO. Round 2. Fight. KO. Round 3. Fight. KO. You win.
Right, so appreciate that wasn't a very fair example because that was only a first dan Chloe, so I'll try again and see if we can do it with another more experienced player.
Get ready for the next battle. Round 1. Fight. KO. Round 2. Fight. KO. Round 3. Fight. KO. Round 4. Fight. KO. Final round. Fight. You win.
So as you can see, we've managed to steal this by only using pokes, rather than big moves and launches and combos. Now, not every character has such a strong moveset around poking like Kazumi does, but that being said, it's still important to understand the importance of poking in order to keep your momentum or steal momentum from your opponent if they're relying on big, slow moves and launches. More importantly, it's understanding when you should and should not retaliate. Now, I'm just as guilty as this as anyone, but more often than not, when you're being rushed down while being hit by a million moves, all you want to do is fight back. But as hopefully you now understand, fighting back while you're being hit and it not being your turn is in actual fact the worst thing you can do. If you take nothing else from this video, as a new player, make it this point. If you're being hit, then you need to block, even if it's super hard to do. Wait until you block something, then try to take momentum back from your opponent. I can't stress enough how important it is to understand this, and if you learn it now, it will really help you rank up early on. If we just go quickly back to the Lucky Chloe patch, who admittedly was a very new player, if you just watch, as soon as I start getting my advantage, she never gets a chance to fight back, and you can tell she's trying to press buttons to fight back, but I'm just continuing to outpoke her. Now, if she were to just hold back and block, even if it was only for half a second, then she would have blocked something and it would have been her turn again to press buttons. But as you can see, he or she was just desperate to fight back because they felt like they were being bullied, which in effect they were by me. So although this looks like a pretty sort of shocking example, this isn't the most extreme, and I hope it gets across my point of why it's so important to sometimes just hold back. You don't always have to press buttons all the time, promise. I know it's tempting, but just give it a go. The other final but important part of frame knowledge application is around block punishment. So I have gone into this within my original Tekken spam video, but in short, if you know how minus a move is on block, then you will know what move you can use to punish it with. I suggest you go back and watch that video to get an idea of the punishment options. Right, well I hope that's helped you guys. Remember, this is just a very quick outline of frame data and how it works, but I hope it's enough to give you the basics. If you've enjoyed this video and you feel like I've earned it, please drop it a like, and if you'd like to see more upcoming videos for new and upcoming players, please consider subscribing. Thanks everyone, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.
KO. Round 3. Fight.